Healing the relationship, the man and the mountain. The first step to fixing, healing, reviving, and repairing a relationship between a man and a woman is to reestablish the patriarchal order. No, this does not mean you need to get the woman to follow the man. It means the man needs to fix, heal, revive, and repair his relationship with God first. Quite often, this requires a journey on the part of the man. This experience has been compared to Moses going up into the mountain to be with God. Let's look at the modern implications of such a process. First, the man may ask himself if he really needs to take extra time away from his day-to-day life in order to work on this relationship. To be successful, he is going to have to take extra time to pray, ponder, read, and reflect. This may mean that he spends less time with his family. In some cases, he may need to, quote, go away, unquote, from his wife and kids for a time. I recognize that many people fear separation because it, quote, always, unquote, leads to divorce. I believe this is probably true when a couple does not include God in the process of healing their marriages. It has been my experience that when a man takes the time to climb the mountain, to do what it takes to reconnect with God, God sustains the process and keeps the marriage alive, even if it is on life support. God and his prophets are the best trainers for how to teach a man to be a good man, husband, and father. Too often I see men breaking the commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." The man must resist the temptation to be lazy and turn to his wife for his training. A wife may be able to tell him what is wrong, but she will not be the expert on how to fix it. She can help, be a helpmeet, a little here and a little there, but if the patriarchal order is going to be firm and strong, the man will need to be able to get all of his instruction and fortification from God, like he did before he was married. Sometimes I have men who are resistant to this idea. When they are, I ask, which woman was meeting your needs, giving you instruction, and helping you rejuvenate before things got serious with your wife? Some have been tempted to say, my mother. Then they realize that that would sound childish or adolescent. Those who worked hard on their development from their late teens into their early 20s have been highly motivated to demonstrate their ability to take care of themselves without the help of their parents. The wise ones used this time of life to tie a strong anchor to their God. Unfortunately, some tied an anchor to God with the idea that once they got married, they would shift getting their needs met to their wives. Unknowingly, by doing so, they are breaking the commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." For those men who did not tie a strong anchor to God before they were married, you are going to have extra work to do. I won't have time here to describe this process, but there are many books on the subject, including my booklet called Undeniable Communication with God. For those men who did tie a strong anchor before they were married, you will need to retighten your anchor when things aren't going as well as you would like in your marriage. You are going to have to go through the fourth stage, as mentioned before, and go through your own born-again process. This means you are going to have to look internally and find out what you can change, what you can do differently. You will need to avoid the temptation to find fault in your partner by applying the mote and beam principle. And if you find yourself completing the born-again process before your wife, I invite you to be patient with whatever your father is doing with his daughter. Resist the temptation to interfere with the work he is doing with her. It is a very complicated process to help a woman grow, develop, and work through her own born-again process. Do you really want to get in the way of that? And if you, quote, need, unquote, her to get through it faster, you may want to look in the mirror one more time and observe that if you, quote, need, unquote, something from her, then you are not sufficiently anchored to God. Don't forget, if she were to die, you and God would be able to work through anything. So, if she is not there for you, pretend she is dead, and take care of the basics and move forward. If you come off the mountaintop to find that your woman has died, or become ill in your absence, jump in and help quickly. Remember, while you are up in the mountain figuring yourself out, she is stuck with the kids, the home, and her own development issues. She may be frustrated with you that you took so long. She may not handle things well in her exhaustion. If you have truly reconnected with God, you will not take this unpleasantness personally, but you will have compassion for her pain and struggles. You will lighten her load. Read on to see what she will be going through while you are gone. Now, we need to look at what the woman is doing while the man is climbing the mountain. Pioneer woman mode. Treat your spouse like you treat the weather. We hear the concept over and over again in different ways, but application is not as easy as it sounds. Do not rely on other people to change in order for you to maintain sanity. Some time ago, I was in a leadership meeting where the speaker said something like, "We are amazing as human beings. We can live on the North Pole or at the equator. We can live in the ocean or in the desert. We are a very intelligent and adaptable species. So if you want your relationship to work, use these adaptation skills and treat your spouse like the weather." Too many books on relationships these days revolve around relying on the other person to change. There are many definitions of codependency, but the one I use most is that if your sanity and happiness are dependent on someone else being different, then you are being codependent. As I have referred to earlier, the change process for individuals is a very complex process that only a God can orchestrate. As a clinician, I have been greatly humbled by this process, and I do not dare participate in working on the development of an individual unless they are asking me directly to do so, and we are in my office where I can work very closely with the Holy Ghost. Please, work with your spouse the same way. Do not give feedback unless asked for, and only do so in a very contained and spiritual environment. Many who come to me hear me teach this and then ask, "But what if my spouse needs to change?" What if I were to translate this concern into the clinical language associated with the paradigm of, what if the weather is too painful to live in? Let me discuss that type of situation. In Utah, there is a wide range of weather conditions, but overall, it is a pleasant place to live. Our homes, buildings, and roads are built with an understanding of the possibilities of cold, snow, rain, heat, etc. Most of the time, the weather conditions can be enjoyed with slight adaptations. Occasionally, there are extreme weather conditions that can cause destruction. The residents work hard to recover and then decide if it is worth it to live here, risking the possibility of destructive weather in the future. I personally struggle with the idea of living in a place like Oklahoma. When I hear about homes being destroyed again by tornadoes, I ask myself, does that surprise anyone? Didn't they know that there was a strong possibility tornadoes would hit that area? Why don't they choose to live somewhere else? When someone comes into my office for relationship issues, one of the first things I do is assess what type of weather conditions they are living in. Does the weather, living conditions, bring frequent dangerous experiences, addictions, lying, infidelity, anger, or violence, etc.? Or is the weather just inconvenient and will require some adaptation? Now, back to the people of Oklahoma. After a recent tornado, I was watching a news report with a local government leader discussing the experience. With a confident and calm tone, he said something like, "We are not afraid of these tornadoes. We are ready for them. All of the people are safe because we have an excellent warning system. All of the buildings will be quickly rebuilt. It is inconvenient for many to have their homes and other property destroyed, but we are not devastated. We expect it to happen, and we recover quickly." I don't expect everyone to have the type of personality that would either enjoy or survive living in Oklahoma or living in a relationship that is tornado-like, but I do expect everyone to take the responsibility to decide what they are going to live with. Some are extremely resilient and thrive on the challenge. They don't mind working on quick and complete recovery systems. I am just fine with those who choose to and can live this way, but if you are getting hurt beyond repair living where you live, then it would be wise to move. If you are being hurt beyond your ability to recover, you need to withdraw to a safe distance. This does not mean you should be quick to divorce. It just means you should decrease interaction to the point where the other person cannot hurt you. Once you are safe, you can work on healing. Once you are healed, you can decide whether or not to stay married. Sadly, sometimes it takes a divorce to ensure one's safety and security. If, after significant pondering and consideration, you discover that the behaviors of the other person are just inconvenient and not painfully unrecoverable, then I invite you to stop asking the other person to change and just make the necessary adaptations. Do not insult yourself into thinking you cannot find a way to thrive in an environment that is different than you expected. Believe in yourself. Then look at your spouse's history. Were they the kind of person that was working on self-improvement when you met them? Were you satisfied with the pace of improvement they were using when you met them? If they were improving without your help before you were married, then they will probably improve without your help while you are married to them. I do encourage each member of a relationship to work hard to fill themselves so full of energy and resources that they have surplus for their spouse whenever possible. I also recommend that you budget your energy well enough that you can include some for your spouse on a regular basis. This is not much different than budgeting money when you have limited resources. I recommend you, if your partner is not a tornado, make an effort to give more energy to your partner than you take every day as an act of good character on your part, whether you feel your partner deserves it or not. I have no problem with you offering help to your partner, but make sure it is not because you need them to be different for your sake, but because it looks like they may feel edified by your contribution. But what about working on the marriage? Stabilizing a relationship, or at least stabilizing yourself. The wheel-thrown pottery principle versus the clothes washer pattern. When I was in my early years of college, I took a wheel-thrown pottery class. I was really excited to learn that creative form of art. I hope it doesn't shock any of you, but back then I was a bit of an arrogant young man. I just wanted the teacher to get out of the way and let me take over with the wheel. I had a wise and observant teacher who correctly discerned my disposition. He could see my impatience, so he did just that, and he got out of the way to let me have at it. So I took my cube of clay and slapped it on the wheel just like he did, then flattened center left, just like he did, right? Not. There was something wrong with my clay. It couldn't be my fault. My instructor watched me out of the corner of his eye while he worked with other students. He might have had a smirk on his face. After about 20 minutes of this proud determination, I finally decided to be humble enough to ask for help. I raised my hand. He was a kind and patient man and skillfully taught me what was wrong. He said, "Maurice, the problem is not your hands or your strength. The problem is your elbow." My facial response showed that I thought he was crazy. He went on to explain, "You might not notice this, but when I am at the wheel, the first thing I do is make sure my right foot is tight and solid on the ground. Then I make sure my right elbow is tightly settled inside my right knee. Then I use my right hand against the clay, similar to the way an old record player works. The shape of the clay then has to move against a solid wall." He went on, "What you have been doing wrong is by having both arms and elbows free, it creates flexibility to accommodate the out-of-balance spin in the same way that the springs in a clothes washer accommodate an out-of-balance spin. The springs don't fix it, they just allow for it." As a relationship therapist, I see the same things over and over again with the couples with whom I work. They react and react and react to each other. This is with both good behaviors and bad behaviors. If a relationship is going to become centered before it is lifted to greatness, instead of reacting to each other, at least one, if not both, are going to have to live by something more solid than their partner. At least one of the two is going to have to anchor themselves into something stronger than themselves and stick with it. At least one of them is going to have to choose their thoughts and actions based on character, not based on reacting to their partner. At least one of the two is going to have to anchor themselves into a set of eternal principles and a divine source of wisdom and power. If you would like more control, less drama, and more stability, I strongly recommend that one be you. The grief cycle, dealing with disappointment. One of the first women to be respected as a psychology theorist was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She came up with something called the grief cycle. It was designed to help people work through the death of loved ones. It can also be used to help people work through the death of a dream, including the dream of a successful marriage. If we add some spiritual insights, these principles can help individuals deal with disappointment in their relationships. Kubler-Ross started with denial. "This can't be happening to me. Didn't I do everything the way they said to keep this from happening? I don't want to be a statistic." The next stage is what she calls bargaining. I call this the thinking stage. What if we had just known? Maybe if we had just done this different, or maybe if we had done that different, maybe if we could do this next. There are a couple of different ways to bargain or to think. This is where I start to add some enhancements. One of them creates a nice, fun, that's sarcastic, little merry-go-round called fretting. Fretting is thinking without inspiration. It is very painful when you can't find a working solution for your marriage. Smart women resist moving into the next 3 stages because they believe they can find a solution. And why not? They've been successful in finding solutions in most other areas of their lives. So they go around and around and around, chewing on every aspect of their experience, hunting for a solution. Now I want to make sure the reader knows that I do not discuss this topic with any mockery. I have learned to have a great deal of respect for the process women go through in these situations. I have learned that the reason they do this is because women, at least most of the ones I have worked with, have a deep hope for miracles. Fretting is painful because, without inspiration, high-speed thinking can create anxiety and depression. There is another type of thinking one can use at this stage of the cycle, which can lead to a miracle. It is challenging, though, to maintain this different kind of thinking. Keeping your mind and body in the condition necessary to have access to inspiration is a challenge. This is what I call pondering. Pondering is thinking while remaining calm and confident. Pondering is thinking without fear. Pondering increases the likelihood of inspiration. Fretting decreases the likelihood of inspiration. It is glorious when a miracle can be found. It is glorious when a spouse responds to the ideas you try to implement. If there is no miracle today, if you find yourself disappointed, you have a choice between two types of pain. You can return to fretting, or you can move on to the next stage of the grief cycle. The next stage Kubler-Ross discusses is anger. This is what you feel when none of your ideas are working. You may kick things and use strong language in your head, even if you don't out loud. You get mad. Some of your anger can be attached to your frustrations about things not being the way they were supposed to be. This is the stage when women are most likely to misbehave themselves and feel justified doing so. I have seen everything from significant eating changes to throwing things to serious sexual indiscretions. Not a fun stage to be in. My hope is that each woman will find activities in which they can channel this energy so they will not do things that would make them feel embarrassed if caught on video. After, or mixed with anger, there is a sadness stage. Some call this depression, but there is a difference between being sad and being depressed. Sadness is a normal, healthy feeling to have when your life isn't going as planned. I define depression as when there doesn't seem to be a legitimate reason to feel sad. Depression is usually a genetic condition. Sometimes it is due to thinking errors. A person can be both sad and depressed at the same time. You can guess that this would be uncomfortable. We can talk about depression more at another time, but let's return to sadness. While grieving, some people spend more time being angry and some people more time being sad. Most women bounce back and forth between both of these stages. The fifth stage is resignation. Resignation means to come to the awareness that this is just the way things are. The question is asked, does that mean to surrender? There are two versions of surrender. There is the powerless, weak version of surrender. This is often described as victim mode. My life is ruined now and there is nothing I can do about it. Or there is the pioneer woman mode. You just kicked me out of my house in Nauvoo. Fine, I'll go to Utah and build a whole nation. It is a form of surrender, but more of a form of acknowledgement of reality as it stands now. Things are not the way I hoped they would be, but I'll make the best of it. Personal note. My own experience with the grief cycle revolves around infertility issues. When it finally became apparent that we would not be having any more kids, I went into my own resignation mode asking, what does that mean? That means that my son, adopted from my wife's first marriage, will be 20 years old when I'm 40. That gives me a ton of time to do some really cool stuff with an empty house. I could work on a lot of projects designed to serve the world if I don't have more kids to have stewardship over. And so, it took some time, but I was ready to not have any more kids. Now here is where I need to emphasize the main difference between typical men and typical women when it comes to the grief cycle. Masculine psychology encourages people to get off the merry-go-round at this point. Become resigned, stay resigned. There are some healthy reasons for this at times, but I will not address those here. The problem, though, that can occur is that if people stopped believing in miracles, unlikely outcomes, the whole world would stagnate. Let's add a little more to what Kubler-Ross taught. I have observed that this is where, after a brief resignation, women experience something powerful. Unfortunately, we can't really clarify whether or not this powerful thing is a blessing or a curse. As you will see, it depends on how things turn out. At this point in the cycle, after trying to stay resigned, the woman often rebegins the grief cycle by going into what I call a denial of reality, otherwise known as hope. I consider this hope out of nowhere, a gift from God. Quite often, the hope that comes into the heart of a woman, and yes, some men also, is against the odds, against logic, against reality. If the idea comes to fruition, it will be a miracle. Continuing with my personal story, I came home one day after I was well prepared for a life with no more children, and my wife said, "I've been thinking," one of the worst phrases for a man to hear a woman say. But she had been planted with hope. She was denying reality. What if we could still, maybe if... For a while, to avoid going through the grief cycle again, I had been inclined to throw water on every hope she had. Stop hoping for things. I just wanted to stay resigned. My wife said, "What if we try adoption?" I thought, have you seen the statistics on that? I went into a logical, mathematical mode. She says, yeah, but there's a chance. I now call my wife Babe Ruth. She seems to have a record for the most strikeouts and the most home runs. She gets up to the plate and swings her heart out. So what happened in our case, after dozens of times of going through this cycle, there was a miracle. The beautiful daughter we have now came into our lives due to my wife's denial of reality, or hope. Miracles. What I have learned is that if you stay resigned, there are no miracles. There are no miracles if you stay logical. There are no miracles if you don't hope. Unfortunately, this is where tension and or contention surfaces in many relationships. One spouse wants to stay resigned. The other experiences hope. If you stay resigned, you don't have to visit anger and sadness anymore. Honey, if you just stay resigned, you don't have to be angry or sad. That is the solution to your emotional problem. If you hope, statistically speaking, we are probably going to have to go through all this pain again. Spouses or loved ones often try, with good intent in most cases, to prevent anger and sadness by killing hope. I have realized that hope is very deeply ingrained in women. When I look at the big picture, especially the divine picture, what if all women stopped hoping? What would happen to our culture? At best, it would stagnate. More than likely, it would deteriorate. This means women are blessed with a curse. Women get up to the plate and hope, and will probably strike out at least 2 out of 3 times like a baseball player does. This means women are going to be angry and sad. Men validate it all the time in sporting situations. I have learned that if I want to be on the team with my wife, if I am going to be one with her, I need to join her in both denial of reality and pondering, not to just sit on the sidelines, stubbornly resigned, and wait for her to get over it. Miracles are by definition something based on a low percentage. So, if I can join her in experiencing a miracle, it will be glorious. But if I am going to be a connected spouse, I need to join her in the anger and sadness as well. There is an energy inside of all women. They can go to bed crying under their wagon, and before the men wake up the next morning, she has the fire built and says, "Let's do this," because she has been filled with a new hope. Knowing where you are in the grief cycle helps facilitate moving between the stages. Unfortunately, if you have been brainwashed a little bit by American psychology, you may have been told that the denial of reality and reigniting the thinking stage again are mentally unhealthy. I propose that it is important and healthy, although uncomfortable most of the time, for people to revisit the grief cycle. If people don't hope beyond logic, opportunities for miracles cease. By the time I meet a couple in my office for marriage therapy, there is a lot of damage to the marriage. It is this hope, this denial of reality, which gives the relationship a chance for a miracle. In almost every case, if both can tap into hope, a miracle can be found. Statistically speaking, this hope usually comes from the woman. When you break out of the grief cycle prematurely, what is unhealthy is when a person skips or avoids any one of the stages. Imagine having hope, and your hope doesn't come to fruition, and you don't get angry. That means you have no fire in you. You're bland. You go straight from failure to sadness. You don't have any energy at all to be upset about it. Now imagine not being sad at all. That would be weird. That's a little unhealthy to not be sad at all. Skip resignation and you have problems. Straight from sad to happy and hopeful, that's like being bipolar. You ought to plod along like a pioneer woman for at least 24 hours before you get enthusiastic or hopeful again. And if you take all hope out of your life, then what do you have? Yes, there is a time to stay resigned and not regain hope again, but you are the only one who will know when it is that time. Only personal inspiration can tell you when it is time to let something die. We will talk more about when to just let something die and how to survive the death of a dream another time. In my experience with quality women, they need to feel like they have done all they can do, so they are going to have to go through the grief cycle many times. It is usually painful and difficult, but if a miracle can be found, it makes it all worth it. Conclusion. The process of healing a traumatized relationship might be a little different than expected if one only has modern science as a resource. Learning to apply eternal principles to fundamental relationship repair can make all the difference. While it may be initially disappointing to come to the realization that your spouse is insufficiently equipped to meet your needs, it is comforting to know that you don't have to live in pain while they complete their developmental process. If done correctly, if the man and the woman, each as individuals, will temporarily retreat from their relationship and submit themselves to the incubator of the arms of divinity, they can each be healed from the pain of the past. Each can more gradually and accurately reinvest in the relationship. Each can avoid the severe pain of the misbehaviors of the other, because they will have built their emotional foundation on divine footings instead of on the shoulders of their partner. Appendix A. Books that Made a Difference. Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus, by John Gray. The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, by John Gottman. Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You, by Jordan Paul. Should We Stay Together, by Jeffrey H. Larson. Anything by Steve Covey.